In a world of chaotic noise, the podcast Keep Walking With Me searches for potential solutions towards the best version of ourselves. One likes to make questions, the other loves to find answers. Nuno and João are partners from the Walking Mentorship, and they bring the inside look in the life of the people they walk with.
Welcome to the podcast Keep Walking With Me. Today we have with us a very special guest. So first of all, let me ask you in a nutshell, who is Shane O'Mara?
Shane O'Mara is me, and I am Professor of Experimental Brain Research at Trinity College Dublin. And I have obviously from my title, I'm interested in the brain and how the brain works, but I'm also an avid walker, and I've recently written a book called In Praise of Walking, which attempts to tell the story of walking from a completely different perspective, from the inside out, what happens in your body and brain when you walk, and from the outside in, what effect walking has on you, but on society at large.
Well, it's definitely a great read because we've loved that. We have a funny story about that book actually, but we'll may get there later.
Yes.
But going a little deeper on this area of interest, so you kind of work in an area that's full of questions. I mean, our own brain is such a mystery. And we live in times of such certainty. Everyone seems to be absolutely positive of so many things. How is it to deal with this much more mysterious organ that we have inside?
Well, I think the truth is it is humbling that we actually really don't know how the brain works. We have, some design principles from evolution. We have new tools to investigate what happens in the brain when the brain is doing tasks. How is it that I'm conscious that I'm conscious? We don't really have a good answer to that. So, what we should be is a little bit more intellectually humble in the face of the mysteries that we have before us. Whether it be the best method of dealing with the COVID pandemic or other questions to do with how is it that the brain itself functions.
Well, let me follow up a little bit on that, because definitely this issue of humility and actually being humble in face of what we don't know, which is great actually, because it leaves so much for us to learn and to discover and to find out. So this is absolutely amazing. I struggle thinking about a world where we know everything. It would be bore, I think. Of course, we do want to know more, but in what areas do you think we are going to have deeper knowledge about our brain, and specifically the area you mentioned, our conscience and how our personality, maybe the way this regulates how we behave?
Yes, so that's a very deep and difficult question in some senses, because the brain is the last great undiscovered territory for science. So I think we've kind of mapped out lots of other things, but understanding how and where and why, or what the methods are that we should go forward with are very difficult. And I think what we're starting to see in brain science is this kind of view that we should reorient how we think of the brain. So for some hundreds of years, the way to understand the brain is, let's say you're interested in vision, or you're interested in hearing or touch or something like that. You follow the stimulus inward, so from the eyes into the brain and into the various parts of the brain where the visual system is concerned. And this has been a very powerful method to kind of understand how parts of the brain might function. But the flaw with all of these kinds of studies is that our behavior, our thoughts, our consciousness is not organized along sensory lines. So the axis that a sensory system takes, in the case of vision, for example, doesn't tell you much about how you will respond to something that you see in your visual field. So I think we're coming to a newer view where we actually think about what happens in the brain has got a lot to do with intrinsic activity, that the brain is purring away, solving problems for you all the time, without you even being aware of the fact that it does so. And I think, again, to think about questions like consciousness, these are, in some senses, very hard problems, but possibly because we aren't thinking about them in the right way. So, we spend 8 hours a day unconscious, and somehow at 7 a.m., 8 a.m. every morning, consciousness is turned on. It's turned off again at midnight or whatever time you go to bed at. So the biology that's involved can't be very complicated in the sense that it's so reliable, it's so clock-like, and it happens to such a consistent rhythm, and it happens in other animals as well, paced by the day-night cycle. So, it may well actually be the case that we will have meaningful answers and useful answers over the coming years, depending on how we approach this problem.
Well, that's absolutely
food for thought.
Absolutely. Let me go back to Praise of Walking. Actually, my first copy of Praise of Walking is somewhere inside an airplane in Geneva Airport, but I tend to believe that someone actually benefit from it. So now I'm thinking about my second copy. And, I definitely remember that in the book, a few times you mentioned that we need to walk. Let me add, why do we need to walk, and probably now more than ever?
Okay, so let's just think about this. There are lots of reasons why we might need to walk. And the kind of the general argument that I place or give in the book is that walking is that kind of elemental form of movement that humans are adapted to and allows us to experience the world in all its wondrousness in a way that you can't on a bicycle, you can't in a car, or from a train or from a plane, as you've mentioned. Now, these give you different vantage points, but the ability to experience the world as it is something that's given to you by movement. And we have brains and bodies that are designed for and profit from movement. And some of your best experiences of life can happen while you're moving about in the world. So at its core, the kind of point that I really want to get across is that we spend an awful lot of time sitting. We spend, as I've already said, 7 or 8 hours per night sleeping. But the kind of wonderful life-affirming properties and resilience-building properties that we can get from movement is something that we can all avail of. And we can do this right throughout the lifespan, from the earliest attempts to move and walk at, let's say, 12 or 14 months of age, all the way up to the other end of life in your 80s or whatever it happens to be. And if you engage in that movement, your life course itself will be healthier, you will be happier, you'll have a greater sense of well-being, but your society will also, if we are all capable and allowed to engage in movement together.
Well, and let me build on the science, actually, that supported somehow the relations between, for instance, walking and mood. How do you think we could measure, if possible at all, walking as a tool to improve, for instance, our mental health, especially during the year that we are living globally?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and actually we do have tools now to measure this. And one of the great advances in terms of measuring mental health on the fly is the smartphone or the mobile phone. And what we can do is get people to provide self-rated numbers or ratings of how they feel at discrete moments in time when they're randomly pinged during the course of everyday life. And there are a great many studies coming along, which have been conducted pre-COVID, in fact, as well, showing that the more you move, the less likely you are to succumb to major depressive disorder, to pick on a particular problem that people have been experiencing. and the World Health Organization has named repeatedly as one of the major psychiatric disorders we will have to deal with over the coming period of time. So I think, if you think about more indirect measures, more walkable cities tend to be cities where people feel more connected. Cities that have more nature in them tend to be cities where people feel a greater sense of restoration. If we allow people to walk with a view of nature, as opposed to imprisoning them in buildings where they've got a good view of the local freeway or local motorway, we see lowered levels of psychiatric distress. So these can feed through in all sorts of ways, but those are the kinds of ways I would think of it principally.
Well, it looks like music might be a good restorative technique as well. So we might ask you if you can give us one first song.
Okay, so the first song that I'm going to choose for you is not a song at all. It's a composition by Miles Davis, and it's from the album Kind of Blue. And it's the first track on the album. It's So What. And I think this is just a most amazing piece of music. Every time I hear the piano, the very spare sound of the piano followed by the complementary bass, it kind of just draws you in and you sink into this piece of music, and along you go. And I think it expresses something that I think is kind of nice as well, that we should maybe take more of a so what attitude to the stresses and strains that some aspects of modern life present us with.
Let's listen to So What.
Yes.
The music written by Miles Davis, he calls So What.
So, well, let me follow up on our previous discussion, on your previous answer. Do you think that actually there might be a scientific basis for the expression walk it off?
Yes, for sure. So one of the kind of, what are you trying to walk off? You're trying to walk off dysphoric emotional states. You're trying to walk off the feeling of stress, all of those kinds of things. And one of the kind of important understandings we've come to over the past number of years is that the stress response actually is not just a fight or flight, it's also a freeze response. Mm-hmm. So getting people up, getting people moving, changes a whole variety of rhythms within the brain and within the body. It allows you to burn off some of the stress hormones, and it actually allows you to engage in activity that might present you through thinking, for example, about the problems that you're encountering, new solutions that you wouldn't have been able to generate had you just been sitting in one place, not exposing yourself to the kinds of activity that can occur across the whole of the brain as a result of movement.
But actually, we tend to believe that not all physical activity has the same impact. And quite often, actually, in our walking mentorship programs, we have the question, okay, what is the difference between walking and running? Is there a different impact in your brain, in your body? Does it work differently? What should I do?
Yeah, so that's a really great question, and there are obviously distinct differences between running and walking. And I don't want to be down on running. I think there are a lot of people who love running, and I think that's great. So humans have some adaptations that make them very good, not fast runners, but low speed runners over long distances. We have head stabilization mechanisms. We have a unique ligament called the nuchal ligament, which stabilizes the position of the head in space. But what humans are exceptionally good at doing is walking very long distances every day from early in life until late in life. So the contrast I like to give, which is maybe not entirely fair, but not, I think, entirely unreasonable either. If you want to learn to become a good long distance runner, running a marathon of 26 kilometers or whatever, from a standing start, that will take you maybe 6 months of fairly consistent training to turn in a sub 4 hours, let's say, marathon. However, if you want to undertake a 1,200 kilometer walk on the Via Alpina or the Camino or the Appalachian Trail, unless you're very, very unhealthy, your body will adapt reasonably quickly. You will be footsore for the first few days, but you will adapt to this pretty quickly. And what we know from following people who live in what are sometimes called ancestral lifestyles, where they don't have mechanized transport and they have to harvest and capture their food through their own physical movement, is that people move a lot, they walk a lot from very early in life, from 4 or so years of age, all the way until very late in life, in their 80s and 90s. So running is something I think that's difficult to continue at a high level for very long periods of years. Maybe at a somewhat reduced level you can. But walking is something you can do, and it's accessible to you, assuming you don't have a mobility impairment, right throughout the course of life.
Thank you. It's clear. Maybe we can talk a little bit about our stress and anxiety and how much that can influence our brain system. And actually, I would like to ask you what can or what we should do to improve this situation, especially, I would say again, when you spend so many hours in front of a screen, computer or a phone.
Yeah, so that's a great question, and it brings in a lot of kind of themes. So the first thing to say is that humans evolved in an open landscape. We didn't evolve in a built environment. And we now live a life that keeps us indoors for perhaps 95% of our waking time, which is completely different to the kind of conditions that we actually evolved in. The built environment as we have it is a feature of perhaps the last 1,000 years, or maybe a little bit longer, maybe 2,000 years or whatever. But for most of our existence, this is not the environment that we lived in. So what we know is that when humans are brought out into nature, they feel a sense of restorativeness from nature when they have the experience of green, and that this reduces the levels of stress hormones, and does so, it seems, to a reasonable degree, to the point that people report quite a high degree of feeling of well-being as a result of being exposed to nature. And I always think it's kind of curious, I suppose, that one of the most prestigious forms of sport in terms of cost and all of the other things is golf, where people walk tremendous distances in these beautifully tended green fairways. So it kind of brings back almost the verdant plains that we might have experienced in Africa all of those thousands of years ago. So regular exposure to nature is something that we need to do more of. And what we see repeatedly is this message coming from neuroscience and coming from psychiatry, coming from psychology, that we need to green our cities and towns because this has a marked effect on the stress levels that people experience. And there's a reason why our leafy suburbs, as they're sometimes laughed at or described as, are more expensive. People are willing to pay in order to have a view of nature. This is why, take the kind of Sentinel or Signal example, Central Park in New York. If you have an apartment overlooking Central Park, that will cost millions more than an apartment that overlooks some other part of New York City. Having a view of green is something that has marked health benefits it reduces stress levels, and is something that we should be designing into our towns and cities, but it's frequently overlooked.
Well, let me pick up on that and just looking a little bit in the same direction, which is unfortunately, or actually in the opposite direction from renaturalizing. It's the permanent connection we are having, or we are witnessing, to technology. I mean, we are looking at screens 24/7. I mean, with children, it can be even scarier in some cases. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so my thoughts are very mixed on this. So I'm not going to try and offer any certainty, and I don't think I should.
That's great.
I think in some senses, if we look at the experience that we've had during this pandemic and compare it to what life would have been like 20 years ago, the presence of the connectedness of the internet has really acted as a balm or a salve in a way that life would have been impossible, 20 years ago. If you imagine, none of us had laptops with built-in cameras. Our ability for us three to connect across this distance would not have been present. It might have been a phone call if we were lucky.
Yeah.
So I see, my own daughter, for example, is able to talk to all her friends quickly, reliably, and regularly and easily, which so I think these are all positives. But I think we do have, once this acute phase passes, when we have vaccines, or we've all been vaccinated, we're really going to need to look in much more detail at how we spend more time in the outdoors with each other. And we're going to have to think, especially as so many people now live in towns and cities, how we green our towns and cities. And there have been some great examples of this. In Paris, for example, the mayor of Paris, Anne Hidalgo, has the vision of Paris as the 15-minute city where everything you want is within 15 minutes walk of your front door. And I think these issues around design are really important. We need to be bringing in planters with trees. We need to encourage wildlife. We've seen the devastation of bee populations over the past 10 or so years. All of these kinds of things are things that humans can make a material difference to, but we need policies in place in order to make these changes happen.
Well, probably I would suggest that you give us a second music to help us, build up on this positive thinking.
Yes.
Okay, so my second piece of music is a song by David Bowie. It's from his Station to Station album. And this is a song called Wild is the Wind. To my mind, it's the very best recording of Wild is the Wind. Nina Simone recorded it, and it was originally recorded by Johnny Mathis in the mid-1950s. And it's kind of a homage in a way to Nina Simone's recording, but there's a very gentle, quiet, or it is a very gentle and quiet version of the song. It builds very, very slowly and releases you from it very, very slowly. So I think it's a song that carries love and loss, and it's really, really quite remarkable.
All right.
Let's listen.
Let me fly away with you, for my love is like the wind, and wild is the wind. Oh, with your kiss, my life begins. Oh, spring to me, all things to me. Don't you know your life itself? Like the leaf clings to the tree. Oh, my darling, cling to me. Oh, well, like creatures in the wind, and wild is the wind. Wild is the wind. Wild is the wind. Wild is the wind.
Well, it's always a pleasure to listen to David Bowie, and actually this just remind me of the fact that some years ago you've done a TED talk about zombies. I mean, it's on the internet, so we cannot really hide it from it. Let me ask you. Did you ever come across a zombie in the world today, in whatever meaning you want to pick the answer?
No, happily is the answer. So when I did that talk, I had been playing with ideas about teaching kind of neuropsychological concepts in other ways, and one of the thoughts that I had was around the idea of impossible brains. And I had wondered how you could construct a zombie, or were there aspects of the so-called zombie syndrome that were similar in some way to some of the kinds of things that you see in certain kinds of neurological damage. And of course, you know, you can make a kind of a playful example that there are. So zombies like to consume human flesh in great quantities and do so without stopping. And there are hyperphagic syndromes that you see in humans and in animals who have damage to the hypothalamus, for example. Mm-hmm. So these things aren't a stretch, really. There's shifts in food preferences. You know, animals, for example, that previously would have refused meat if they have damage to the temporal lobe and to the amygdala, show a phenomenon known as Kluver-Bucy syndrome, where they will now eat meat, even though they've previously not been meat eaters. So this was really the kind of starting point for that talk, and I still regularly wonder why I did it.
Well, actually, I found it brilliant because it's great fun. You actually explained very well the connections between the real brain damage and the zombie syndrome, and it's really a very relaxed, very fun way, and you do it with great humor. Actually, it's I loved it, to be honest.
Me too.
It was a career high for me.
Well, but you also developed studies about torture. Is this a dark side of Shane O'Mara?
Well, so so thank you for bringing in the topic of torture. So I've always been a committed anti-authoritarian, and I've always had a very strong sense of the support for human rights. And what interested me in this area it was something very straightforward. I'm interested in, for example, how states like stress, anxiety, and depression affect brain function, and I've worked on those for many years. And I realized when I was looking through the torture memos, as they became called, that have been tried on prisoners at Guantanamo Bay over the 2002 to 2005 period, that these methods were actually deleterious to the very functions that the interrogators were hoping that they might actually enhance in some way. So, for example, we know that one widely used form of prisoner abuse is sleep deprivation, the so-called white torture, to keep people up for days at a time, to break their sleep up. And this makes prisoner handling easier because the person is in a kind of a somnolent state. But it causes reliable deficits in memory. It causes terrible problems for cognition. And if you're trying to get information from somebody that's true, or at least what they regard as true, the last thing you need to do is cause problems for memory, cause problems for cognition. And actually, some recent studies have also shown that sleep deprivation, or when people are sleep deprived, they're much more likely to make a false confession. So they'll confess to something that you know that they didn't do because you have evidence to show that they didn't, perhaps by videotape or because of the way you've set up your study or whatever it happens to be the case. So I've written on this topic quite a bit, and what I've tried to do is pull the evidence together to show that these techniques don't work and that there is actually a better way.
Well, and thank you for that. I think we all need to address that issue. It's really something none of us should be comfortable with. So now, in a more serious tone, really thank you for that, because it's a very compelling argument. Because if regardless of the moral aspects, if you realize that it's pointless, well, maybe it will make a difference for those making the decisions. And so, I really think that was a great step.
Let me just kind of amplify the point you've just made. The funny thing is that experienced interrogators, those who've been in the field, who've been working with terrorists or others, will all tell you that these methods do not work. And they like to say that torture is for amateurs, but interrogation is for professionals.
Well, so looking at the world today, and actually that's pretty much everything that we talked until now, it's the world today in all aspects. In what are you planning to focus your energy in the near future?
So I want to do a couple of things. I'm writing a new book on the theme of human autobiographical memory, how it is that we come to know ourselves, and how we use our memories to imagine alternative futures, and how we use our memory to pass things on through our cultures. So that's one thing that I'm working on. And then I'll continue to work on the kind of research work that I've been doing on the brain systems that are involved in memory. I think we're only scratching at the surface of what it is that we know, where these things are concerned. And then I hope to have many more pleasant conversations about walking. And ideally, if things worked out, maybe bring in some research grants that would allow us to fund some studies on walking. So to do research that has an immediate and real life impact as well.
Great.
Sounds wonderful.
Yes. Can I ask you a quick question? Do you have a favorite route for hiking?
So that's a really good question, and the answer is yes. I love to hike in Wicklow, which is to the south of us here, in particular around Glendalough, which is a most wonderful pair of lakes. It's from the Irish Glendalough, which means the glen of the two lakes. And it is a most wonderful place to hike. And I like it particularly because you can do circuits that can be larger or smaller. You can do them in ordinary shoes, or you can do them in full-fledged hiking boots, where you do a very, very serious circuit that could take 7 or 8 hours, and you get to see amazing wildlife, like deer running and wild horses and all sorts of other things. That, for hiking, that's probably the place I've enjoyed the most. But for everyday walking, I love suburban and urban walking, and I think the theme in my book is very much around recovering walking in everyday life. I don't think walking should be that thing you put on boots to do on a Saturday or a Sunday. It should be something that you can do comfortably in ordinary shoes, even if you have mobility impairments, if you have a visual impairment, or whatever. Our towns and cities should be designed to facilitate the movement of the individual under their own steam, in as much as it is possible to do that for everybody.
I'll totally agree with that.
It should be.
It should be, yeah.
You just mentioned full-fledged, and we heard that you still have a third piece of music that it's kind of a full-fledged music, right?
Okay, so this piece of music is Henry Garecki, Hungarian composer. He was described by Yehudi Menuhin as the most complete composer of the 20th century, and his music is really quite something. It's quite different to most people's tastes, I think. Apart from his Third Symphony, which of course became hugely successful late in Garecki's life, but I've chosen a piece which is really quite remarkable. It's a sonata for 2 violins, and I always kind of this is a piece that goes back to the 1950s, if my memory serves me. I always feel like it's somebody dueling against an unknown and an unheard assailant. I don't know if Garecki thought that, but it certainly feels like that to me. It's a really sharp, fast piece of music that throws you right in off the deep end the moment the initial chords are struck.
So let's get thrown off.
Let's go for it. Well, thank you very much. Shane, we are approaching the end of our walk and talk, let's put it this way. But we still have one more challenge for you, a last one. And this is a classic. So, if you had a time capsule, so we're gonna ask you to kind of build your own time capsule. And you can put whatever you want inside, a message, items. There is no budget constraint, so that's a good thing. And we're gonna, probably shoot it one day into the universe, and a year from now, 1,000 years from now, someone will open, and our curiosity is what they will find inside Shane O'Mara's time capsule.
So this is a curious question. And I think I'm going to give a kind of a slightly offbeat or off-beam answer, which is that I would give them the complete Wikipedia as the kind of uncontested sum of human knowledge as it stands at this moment. So they can look at us and think they knew something, but they didn't know that much.
Well,
That's really.
It will be useful, I guess. Well,
Shane, thank you so much for sharing this moment with us. It's been really a great pleasure, great fun, and also great inspiration. Thank you so much.
And thank you so much for giving us again a podcast that we need to listen 2, 3, 4 times, because there is so much to chew inside that these are the ones we really like. Very juicy. Thank you so much. It was an honor. Thank you, Shane.
Well, thank you both for the invitation as well. I was delighted to do this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Step by step, we walk together towards the best version of ourselves. For more information about our mentoring programs, visit our website walkingmentorship.com. Keep Walking with Me, it is a podcast inspired by the walking mentorship experience.